welcome to another edition of ICSS Wednesday seminar titled The Current US Political Discourses on China. The US China power rivalry is an extensively debated topic in international political landscape. Donald Trump's presidency and the COVID-19 pandemic have sparked fresh debates on various dimensions of the ongoing power rivalries. Technological competition and climate change negotiations have emerged as key contentious areas. US policymakers have faced significant challenges with tech disputes leading to conflict while climate issues demand cooperation. The interplay between these contrasting approaches is complex, especially as technology influences environmental governance and climate talks. These dynamics are pivotal not only for US China relations but also for global governance in the 21st century. In light of this, the seminar explores how the US intends to weaponize its tech dominance to checkmate China's aspirations to rival US tech China's presence to rival US tech dominance given the divergent domestic interests and concerns within the Biden administration. Furthermore, the seminar also explores the strategies of the US to convince the China's leadership to collaborate on climate change issues amid the bilateral tensions in trade and tech domains. The speaker for today's session is Professor G. Venkatraman, who is a professor at the Institute of Management in Indore. Professor Raman is also an honorary fellow at the Institute of Chinese Studies, New Delhi. His research focuses on the current state of US China power rivalries, which primarily includes technology war, climate change, and China's interface with global governance. His most recent publication is a co edited volume titled Locating BRICS in the Global Order Perspectives from the Global South. He has also co authored case studies on Indian businesses in China, which are part of prestigious case centers like IB Publishing's ISB Hyderabad and China Europe International Business School, Shanghai. The chair for today's seminar is Ambassador Kisan S. Rana. He is an emeritus fellow at the Institute of Chinese Studies, Delhi, professor emeritus at Diplo Academy in Malta and Geneva, an archives by fellow at Churchill College in Cambridge, UK, and a public policy scholar at the Woodrow Wilson Center in Washington, D.C. He has served as a diplomat at various levels in several countries. He holds a master's degree in economics from St. Stephen's College, Delhi, and is fluent in Chinese and French language. He has authored and edited 14 books, two of which have been translated into Chinese. His recent publications include Churchill and India, Manipulation or Betrayal, and Diplomacy at the Cutting Edge. Before I hand over to the chair, I would like to ask all participants to follow a few housekeeping rules. All participants are requested to remain muted during the seminar. You may post your questions in the chat box along with your name and affiliation. I now hand over to the chair to take the proceedings forward. Over to you, Ambassador Rana. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Megha Kumari, for launching this seminar. I have a very limited role to play, and before I hand over the floor to the speaker, Professor Venkatraman, who has been introduced, along with a synopsis of all that he is going to say, I simply want to point out that we would prefer if those that have questions put their questions through the chat window. That facilitates efficacious and timely management of the questions. That's a preference, not an absolute dictate. Professor Venkat, you have the floor.
Yes, thank you, sir. Thank you so much. I'm very thankful to ICS for giving me this opportunity to speak in the Wednesday seminar, which is one of the most important events surrounding China studies in India. This topic, which I'm going to speak on, is part of the research which I undertook as part of my Fulbright fellowship. Where I was housed in George Mason University in the US, in Fairfax. So let me get started. I'll start with a small, joke, if one may say so, which has been published in the famous book of Michael Pillsbury, the 100-Year Marathon. And in this book, the joke surrounds around an imaginary conversation between former Soviet leader Brezhnev and Richard Nixon, the former United States president. So Brezhnev basically, this is an imaginary telephone conversation. So Brezhnev basically says that, Mr. Nixon, KGB tells me that you have a supercomputer that can predict events that can take place in 2000. And Richard Nixon, says, oh, yes, you got it right. And then Brezhnev says, if that's the case, then can your supercomputer tell me who are going to be the Politburo Standing Committee members of CPSU in the year 2000? And then Nixon says that, yeah, sure, but then he gives a pause. And then Brezhnev steps in and says that, haha, as usual, you guys are engaging in propaganda. But then, Nixon says that, you see, my supercomputer can answer my questions, but I can't read it. Then Brezhnev says, why not? And then Nixon says, because it's in Chinese, and therefore I cannot read Mandarin. So, this but small joke basically imaginary conversation tells us about, the about the policymakers around the world, not only Americans, when it comes to grasping the China challenge. Now, let me, get in, to the heart of my talk. And before that, before getting to the heart of my talk, I would like to, just give a brief introduction and, try to highlight that, you see, of late, we can see that there is a bipartisan consensus in the United States when it comes to dealing with China. There also seems to be an emerging consensus all around that, China is US #1 enemy or threat to its global supremacy. But despite all this talk, research has gone into finding out how there are different schools of thought when it comes to American policymaking vis-a-vis China. And here I would like to take the help of one Mr. David, Professor David McCott, who has, he's a sociologist, but he has divided, broadly the China watching community in the United States to 4 different schools. He names these 4 different schools as strategic competitors, and then the engagers, and then the competitive coexistence school, and then the new cold warriors. Now, let me briefly try to, highlight what are the salient features of each of these schools of thought, if one can say so. But let me also add a rider that, these 4 schools of thought are not watertight compartmentalizations. The strategic competitor school, basically, it calls for a completely new, robust, hard-headed approach towards China. It says that, Washington is now in long-term competition with Beijing. And so therefore, it's very important that, consensus can be drawn as far as US policy towards China. The focus of this particular, group of scholars is more towards policy making. They advocate a very highly critical view of China. So some of the important people, who advocate, this line of reasoning are Matt Pottinger, Michael Flann, Orville Schell. Some of these people, as we all know, I mean, if you are closely following US-China relations, then these people are were senior, advisories, senior advisors in the Trump administration. Next comes the engagers. The engagers believe that, China, dealing with China it's a long-term investment. And these group of scholars are comprised of people who have, invested a lot on long-term professional and personal ties when it comes to US-China relations. They believe that, whatever we are seeing today, that's not a failure of engagement. And to argue their case, they say that, do, certain sections who criticize us mean to say that, US hurried up facilitating China's entry to WTO? Obviously, that's not the case. If that is, the problem of China's access into WTO is not a problem. The problem is many subsequent American administrations themselves have failed to actually take, the right kind of action and make China account for whatever actions it has done in terms of violation of WTO law. So therefore, engagement per se has not been a problem. Whatever has happened later, that is a problem. So people like David Lampton and Charles Freeman, these are the people, and many others. The third school is competitive coexistence. This particular group comprises of mid to early career China watchers. They reject, the strategic competition. They also like strategic competition guys. They like to focus on policy, but they are more keen on stressing on business and tech policy. So for them, foreign policy begins at home, and therefore they believe in engagement. And people who are, advocating this line of thought include people like Robert Daly, Damien Ma, Kai Sukuo, and others. The last school is basically one comprising of new Cold Warriors. New Cold Warriors comprise of people who adopt a far more strident line than the strategic competitors. They favor quote unquote decoupling to quote unquote managing competition. They believe that Trump administration was very much instrumental in a robust China policy, and they look at China as more than a significant threat. The people who advocate this line of reasoning are people like Mike Pompeo, Gordon Chang of the coming collapse of China fame, Peter Navarro, and people like Robert Spadling, who basically was part of the national security strategy team of Trump. Now, moving on to the next section. In this section, I would like to highlight, what is the challenge that Americans are facing when it comes to dealing with, a China which is increasingly becoming assertive. So the people whom I met during, my stay there, and the larger literature which has come of late in the subject, I'm talking of, very recent literature, they say that, the American policy towards China depends a lot on, the American understanding of Chinese policies and Chinese actions. And given that Chinese policies and actions have been, largely in gray areas, have been not in absolutist terms, or rather vague terms. So therefore, reading, Chinese policy actions becomes a problem in itself. And so therefore, to each and to his own, whichever leadership in Biden's, term, people who were his advisors, including Trump himself, the way they looked at China deals with how did they perceive China to be. And that is bound to be different from how Biden and his team perceives China to be. So therefore, it is very important, for us now to very briefly discuss what are the differing images of China in the minds of American policymakers. Now, this is very, very critical. So given that, China is a growing military and economic power, it's already a regional power, but aspires to be a global power. Both US and China have different global interests. So therefore, what are the images of China as far as American policymaking is concerned? So some of the people whom I met, have described in the following way. Some said that China has, quote unquote, oversized self-conception. Someone said, China wants to overawe rather than just occupy space in the internet, more space, larger space in the international system. Another scholar said China lacks universal set of values as an alternative. And most of what it basically talks about is mostly ideational. And, soon, a caveat is, added here by the people whom I met. They said that, China has become what it has become to us, because of two significant failures on the part of Americans. Number one, United States has failed to deal with the challenges thrown by the rule-based liberal international economic order. And second, of late, especially post-Cold War era, the indulgence of United States, if one may say so, in bouts of unilateralism has only contributed to China's rise in structural terms. More recently, the Chinese economic slowdown, in that context is strategically important because to a certain extent, it has helped in checking the ambitions of China. And then, the Chinese argument of, how American policymakers look at, the West in decline argument and the policies that are borne out in China because of this West in decline argument. And some people like Adam Tooze, has pointed out recently, I was listening to a podcast, and this is something which is very, very interesting. And that is, is United States afraid of the growing presence of China in the sense that earlier China was part of the global supply chains, but increasingly we are coming to an inflection point where China has built so much of a muscle in this whole global supply chain that now things are going to work the other way around. The rest of the world is gradually going to become part of this supply chains which emanate from China. And I'll come to that a bit later, but there is a lot of meat in this argument, as we can see, how Biden has reacted to imposing of tariffs and other things in electric vehicles, solar panels, given that the cause of climate change is very, very close to his heart. So this is one thing which, what is the image of China in American policymakers' mind? Second theme, which is important is, can we say that US and China are locked in Cold War? Well, some people say yes, some people no. What are the arguments that are being put forward if one is talking in favor of a Cold War? So, scholars argue that in favor, they say that it's a genuine clash of ideology. Both are engaged in a certain kind of a slugfest. Both the sides have quote unquote intent and quote unquote capacity. Both have deeply embedded conflicting ideas. And last but not the least, strategic mistrust is extremely high, leaving the scope for each side, giving concessions to the other as little as possible. First of all, concessions itself are difficult to come by, and even if they come by, then there is a lot of strategic mistrust because the other side doesn't trust that there is goodwill involved in this give and take. Now, those who are arguing, saying that no, there's not a Cold War, they say that differences are not ideological. China is not it's not ideological simply because China is not interested in converting other countries into its own fold, just like Soviet Union did in terms of Warsaw Pact and the satellite countries, etc. China is differently oriented to what Soviet Union was. It is more interested in overcoming century of humiliation, realizing the China dream. Its policies are more oriented towards, nationalism. And obviously, it has become what the monster it has because of its participation in a certain international system, which has been born out of the liberal international economic order. Obviously, China is not going to kill the goose which is laying the golden eggs. Third is, many of us tend to, undervalue or not give much of an importance to the various domestic factors in the United States, which play a critical role in framing the US policy towards China. For example, in the US itself, there are interagency issues. So the Department of Commerce and Treasury wants good relations with China. The Department of Defense and the intelligence community, they want a very hard stand on China. So therefore, you have, hawks and doves. In fact, very interestingly, I was talking to one of the very senior advisors, Brigadier Robert Spalding, who, as I mentioned, was earlier part of the national security strategy team. He said US policy towards China is determined not within the United States, but it is determined by Xi Jinping. Then, my eyebrows were raised, my eyes lit up and then said, how come? And then he explained, he said that, you see, if the moment Xi Jinping is, kind of, inviting foreign investment, he is looking for, laying down a red carpet to foreign investors, obviously the Department of Commerce and, Treasury, they all basically try to make the most out of it. And the Department of Defense, and the intelligence community is obviously very hawkish about it. So therefore, the stance of Xi Jinping vis-a-vis the Chinese economy in terms of opening up or closing down, whatever it is, that determines US policy towards China. So whenever Xi Jinping tightens the screws, the gulf between, the hawks and the doves reduces. And whenever, there is a bit of a liberalization of the economy, then commerce and treasury basically part ways along with the, along with the, in comparison to the defense and the intelligence community. So very interesting, observation, I thought. Second is political parties. Although we say it's a bi-party system, largely, predominantly, there are lots of, factions, there are lots of groups within the Republicans and Democrats. Among the Democrats, there are progressives and non-progressives. Among the Republicans, there are liberals, there are conservatives, there are anti-Trump, all kinds of, people are there. And the problem, one of the, scholars whom I met again pointed out one very interesting thing. He said that, one of the reasons for, Trump's, coming to power and Trump successfully mobilizing an anti-China, kind of a constituency is, he says that 35% of the American population are old, uneducated, and, rural based. And the American system is such that 35% of the votes are in rural areas. So therefore, it is very easy for someone like Trump to basically make China, or portray China as quote unquote the other. And so therefore, that kind of a constituency is very much susceptible to this anti-China tirade. And that has also been a contributing factor. Because, the Republicans do so, the Democrats also need to, up the ante. So therefore, the Democrats, who have, the high-tech boys based in Silicon Valley, and so therefore, they basically appeal to them saying that, IPR violations are there, and therefore, you will be forced to have JVs, etc., etc., etc. So therefore, the Democrats have to respond to the Republicans, and so therefore, political compulsions again make China, the common factor. So therefore, this kind of a, game that is being played across in the United States, as far as the major political parties are concerned, that's again an important thing. Third is, for example, certain, scholars are saying that, you see, although tariffs and other things are made out to be an economic battle, the point is that as long as the Chinese EV manufacturers, put plant or, have a manufacturing unit within the United States and give jobs to the local people, United States should not be having any issues. The only issue is when, China is flooding, EV, for example, electric vehicles, and the solar panels, which are costing, huge amount of jobs in the United States. So this is very much a domestic issue as well. So these, set of issues also are playing a significant role when it comes to American policy towards China. Now, in this section, now I would like to, draw the attention of the audience towards some of the, dominant discourses that are basically going around since Trump has been elevated as US president in 2016. To begin with, scholars feel that it is not very clear, why Trump basically suddenly came and completely shook the foundations of US relations with China. Why did he pick up on economic and trade war? what does he mean when he says MAGA, and where does China figure in? Make America great again. Was US actually aiming a fundamental shift in the China policy? Or Trump's administration merely wanted to punish China? In this context, let me bring to your attention basically how the 2017 National Security Strategy Report basically speaks about the word China more than 30 times. 2016, there was no NSS report. 2015, the word China figured only 5 times. So pointing out China along with Russia as revisionist states, was a significant departure. But most importantly, one of the significant things that scholars have pointed out is how during Trump's administration, US suddenly abandoned, the multilateral trading system and switched on to bilateral trading, where tariffs, quotas, sanctions, became very, very common. During Trump administration, China became an existential threat. So some of his senior advisors like Steve Bannon, he said that China is an ideological and existential threat. Newt Gingrich, the former Speaker of the House of Representatives, he said, China is the greatest threat since British Empire in 1770s and, the Nazis and the USSR later. Comes Biden, and then although people expected Biden administration to be mild, and to a certain extent, Biden administration has been mild, but various scholars feel that although the China policy has been mild, the implementation has been pretty robust. And that's a significant difference. Another significant difference is that, the Biden administration has broadened the focus of, it broadened the focus of managing ties with China. So now comes, earlier it was during Trump's time, it was limited to economic war, trade war, but now it is going beyond economic war to military conflict, human rights, East Asia adventures of China. Now, Secretary Blinken, Secretary of State Blinken, he has spoken of 3 possibilities. One is when it comes to US relations to China, one is adversarial, second is competitive, and third is collaborative. But till now, it appears that the Biden administration has largely adopted a policy of coexistence, and people have termed US policy towards China under Biden as one of quote unquote managing competition. Senior advisories, Jake Sullivan and Kurt Campbell, they feel that, there are military threats, but these military threats vis-a-vis China are likely to be confined to Indo-Pacific at the four potential hotspots: South China Sea, East China Sea, Taiwan Straits, and the Korean Peninsula. Rush Doshi, who is, in the White House and is very influential in crafting the China policy, he says that today China is far more aggressive and is a global threat to US and allies. China's long-term goals include breakup of US alliance system, establishing global network of military, support, breaking monopolist, aiming at monopolistic competition, cutting-edge 21st century technology, dominate trade, support authoritarian elites. These are some of the things which China's long-term goals are, according to Rush. So therefore, Biden's strategy of competition without catastrophe are based on 4 elements. One, competition. The Biden administration is very keen to check China's rise as, or perceiving China's rise, as a Sputnik moment. And it wants to check China's rise, just like the Americans basically did take notice when the Soviets launched the first artificial satellite during the Cold War. Biden administration wants to repair the damage to US alliance systems. It wants to constantly refer to interests and values so that it can have an anchor to beat China on, human rights and other issues. And it looks for limited cooperation on global problems. I have how much of time?
Yeah, about 5 minutes, Venkat.
Okay. Yeah.
5 or 6 minutes. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Now, this kind of a policy of Biden has been Biden administration has been criticized, by former Trump advisors like Matt Pottinger and Eric Gallagher. They say that this quote unquote managing competition risks, putting process over outcomes. It prioritizes bilateral security over global security. So therefore, they advocate, we should not be managing conflict, and nothing short of outright victory would help. They say that they advocate that US should be uncomfortably confrontational, quote unquote, uncomfortably confrontational. However, Biden administration advisors, senior advisors like Rush Doshi and others have said that, managing competition makes more sense because it makes US more competitive. It will not alienate, other allies who perhaps are interested in having some kind of a relationship with China. And so therefore, they would not like to be pitched in this us versus them kind of a battle when it comes to US versus China. Uh, Also, certain set of scholars are saying that, China's aggressive tactics are going to be self-undermining, and it will affect its own vitality. So therefore, and last but not the least, China is not erstwhile Soviet Union. China boasts today of a significant industrial strength, and so therefore, it's a long haul that we are looking at. So therefore, looking for an outright victory is not the right kind of strategy. When it comes to the tech war, the idea is to strangle China's artificial ambitions, AI ambitions, artificial intelligence ambitions. The Biden administration has introduced slew of measures. It calls them, Secretary Blinken has called it, quote unquote, small yard, high fences policy. As far as climate change is concerned, US feels that China is compelled to collaborate because of its domestic compulsions. It's the largest emitter of greenhouse gases, and US is therefore putting pressure to use the compulsions of China as to its own advantage. And so therefore, the American administration is more helpful and feels that although there are a lot of challenges on the tech front, but there is ample scope for collaboration as far as dealing with the climate change is concerned. So I would, stop here. There's a lot more to say, but perhaps I would be able to address some of these questions, some of the questions, which will be raised by the audience, and talk a bit more about, the tech war and climate change. So that's it from now. That's it from here.
Thank you very much, Venkat. You've completely respected the time limit I had suggested to you. I'm much obliged.
Thank you, sir.
I have a couple of points to make. First, I think it's very interesting that you divide the different schools of thought in the United States in relation to China, and you categorize them by their giving them a short title and give the characteristics of each. I think this is a very good way, if I may say, of approaching this issue.
Sir, sorry, I don't want to interrupt you, but just to say that this categorization is not mine. It has been given by another US scholar.
Sure, of course. I mean, we all borrow ideas from one another, and there is absolutely nothing wrong in picking up good ideas. I think it was Kanti Bajpai who attempted a similar categorization quite a long while back, more than 20 years back, perhaps, of Indian schools of foreign policy analysis. Anyway,
yes.
Putting that aside, the WTO and China. You mentioned this at an early part of your statement. One of the great Indian experts on WTO is Ambassador Mohan Kumar, who is at the Jindal University and, in fact, heads the international affairs section. And he makes a very powerful point that when China joined WTO, it was given a whole series of not concessions, but easy ways to join because that was the time when the expectation was that if China becomes prosperous, sorry, that's that's I have to switch this off. Uh, my apologies. So at that time, there was the expectation that China will be socialized, that China will become a player of our rules, the global order as established by the West. Of course, these were Western rules, and nobody stopped to ask, why the hell should China play by your rules? After all, these are rules that you framed. They are not universal rules at all. The developing countries don't buy into those rules even remotely. Anyway, that was one line of thinking. So Mohan Kumar makes the powerful point that it was a gross mistake to have made things so easy for China, and China took full advantage of that. That's something worth thinking about. The other large point I want to make is, this is my second point, that why should we be surprised that China pursues its foreign policy, its way of dealing with the world in terms of its own interests? Why should every country not pursue their own interests? And this will produce a clash. In the case of China, in addition to all the things you mentioned, there is also the Chinese obsession with the permanence of party rule. And I think this has been a significant driver in the policies of President Xi Jinping. This pushes him into doing things which take what is presented as a long view to ensure the permanence of the party rule, the Communist Party rule in China. And the net result, of course, of all this is that a series of actions have been taken which are perhaps in their own nature counterproductive. That's something that you might like to comment on. You asked if I had another point which I can't immediately locate. Yes, that China presents itself as a leader of the global South. It says so quite openly. But in doing this, it is faced with a dilemma. The BRI projects have involved Chinese loans and investments abroad that total around $1 trillion US. That's a huge amount of money. And much of this is not going to come back because some of the money has been eaten up, some of the money has been misused, some of the projects were not economically viable, although they were socially beneficial, but the economic returns were very poor. And this applies to transport networks, ports, etc. So how does China get out of this dilemma? This also is likely to affect its future conduct. I wonder if you have any comments on these points. We have so far just one question in the chat window, but maybe one or two more questions have been added since I looked at it. And I will leave it to Megha Kumari perhaps to read out those questions. But first, you may like to comment a little bit, a few minutes, please, in relation to the points I made. And Megha, please be ready to read out one by one the chat window questions. Thank you very much.
Yeah, I mean, the first point which you have spoken about China and WTO, and one really wonders that when China said, when the Americans said that, we want to socialize China into the international fold, and the hope that, once China becomes a part of the rule-based liberal international economic order, gradually we will be able to democratize China domestically. One wonders to what extent, the Americans meant. And so therefore, one of the people whom I met, he was also sharing that was this, although it might be a huge understatement, can we basically infer that this was just lip service, and actually, given the advantage of globalization, the outsourcing, the offshoring, the way in which, the supply chains can be constructed, was it not, the American business successful lobbying by, American businessmen, the big American multinationals who actually uh, kind of wooed the American policymakers to, talk on these lines. So that is what the point is. So everything else is just, linguistic jugglery. So therefore, every time, once in 4 years, presidential elections take place, China is, held out for criticism on the basis of human rights, and but someone says it's the economy stupid. Someone says engagement, constructive engagement. Someone says something else, but the show went on and on and on. And so therefore, the engagement guys say that, was it a failure on, the part of people like us who actually say, what else the American administration could have done but to facilitate Chinese entry to WTO? But once that has happened, what has the American leadership itself done? Perhaps your commitment to WTO cause itself was on shaky grounds. If that would have been on firm grounds, you should have brought China to, pay for whatever violations it has done.
Right.
But you didn't do it as long as, it worked for you. And now you are crying foul. That's absolutely unfair.
Good.
So that's my response to, your first thing. Second is, I'm not going in order. China and Global South, again, very interesting. One of the scholars, again, whom I met, he was saying that, Global South is an interesting, concept which is coming out. But the point is, and this is what Americans are also, optimistic about. They are claiming that, Global South, China doesn't have all the answers to the challenges faced by Global South. And so therefore, the Global South is in a position to pick and choose sides depending on its convenience now. And so therefore, better times, they are in for better times. And so therefore, in US-China relationship, the Global South is increasingly going to become a very critical variable. I'll stop at, that. The third one you were talking about, so the third issue which you raised was about, what was that? I'm sorry, I'm forgetting.
The permanent rule of the CCP.
Yeah. So therefore, I mean, just like, the Americans have, their own system, they have liberal values. China is definitely entitled to, swear by its own values. And you cannot force China to, force China to toe your line. And so therefore, I was just listening to a podcast. It's good that you brought this, and this partly explains this problem. So Adam Tooze, of Columbia University, the historian, and he says that everyone says that, uh, what does, China expect from the West? But then why don't people ask, what does the West expect from China? Does the West expect of China to just catapult and do whatever, it says, and blindly follow its line and say that, you cannot break the rules of the system. You can do whatever you like as long as you do not cross the red line. Who defines the red line? And why should, the United States-led West be given the sole authority or prerogative to determine what constitutes the red line itself? I hope, I've been able to,
Thank you very much.
somewhat respond to your questions.
Absolutely. Thank you very much indeed.
Yeah,
Megha
thanks.
Kumari, would you please tackle the first, read out the first chat window question?
Yes, yes, Ambassador Rana. So the first question is from Rajkumar for Dr. G. Venkatraman sir. Does any public or private sector entity in India has deeply studied Chinese capitalist Communist Party's model of 18 trillion economy, and can India learn any lessons from it to go from current nearly 4 trillion economy to at least make up the difference between PRC and USA economies in medium to long term? Thank you.
I'm very sorry, Rajkumar. The shortest answer to your question is I really don't know. There's no harm in accepting one's ignorance. I might blabber something, and talk of number of things here and there, but if you are able to raise a question which is more confined to the talk today, US, China, and perhaps implications for India, I might be able to say a thing or two. But why Indian government is not making the reforms needed to grow up the economy on the level of China? There are better people placed who can answer this question. I am a complete novice at this, answering this question. I'm sorry.
Let's go to the next one, please.
Another question is again from Rajkumar. So, why Indian government not making the reforms needed to grow up economy on the level of China, as asked numerous times by Japan and USA? Will Modi
Megha,
3.0? Yes, yes,
Megha, this
Ambassador.
is a question in the same category. I think the previous reply
Right.
would apply
Yeah.
to this very directly. Let's go to
Okay,
the next one, please.
okay, Ambassador Anna. So the next question is for you. Is there any examples in world history in which world regional hegemon has pumped up its rival state economy, giving the analogy of USA versus PRC to internally break up the rival state by creating economic destabilization, leading to civil unrest in it as PRC has gained 18 trillion economy status in just 30 plus years and now going downwards after the US takeover and de-risking strategy. Thank you.
This is addressed
Uh,
to Sir,
Addressed to
actually.
Ambassador Rana, yes.
Yeah.
well, it's this is really the event at which Venkat is the performer. He's the star of the show. So I think I should stay away from this, but except to say that uh, to say that there are many things that the United States could have done in the past which it didn't do. We could discuss that as a matter of ifs, if only that had happened and that had not happened. I don't think this would lead us to any worthwhile conclusions that we could apply to the issues which we have on the table today. Thank you very much. My apologies for not being able to say more about this. Next question, please.
Again,
Okay, Ambassador Rana. So the next question is has been asked by Imran Akhtar from Afghanistan. So, what are the potential implications of the evolving US-China dynamic on the stability and future of Afghanistan under Taliban rule? Thank you.
again, I'm sorry, Yeah, I'm just not having the right kind of expertise to answer this question.
Next
Uh,
one, please.
the next question is from Ravi Bhutalingam. China is today the leader in technology relating to green energy and green mobility, as in many other fields of science. Since climate change is an existential threat to all of us, does it not make sense to partner in the best possible way with China to overcome this threat? Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you, sir. I think because of the time limit, I couldn't elaborate on that particular point. Yeah, I mean, China is today, major leader when it comes to EV, lithium batteries, uh, and solar panels. Uh, Now, this is the problem when it comes to Biden's policy towards China. On one hand, he is, uh, he's raising tariffs, and other kinds of, duties when it comes to Chinese imports to the US market. But at the same time, you know, this is a cause which is very, the climate change issue is, global warming is a cause which is very dear to Biden's heart. And and then given that the Chinese exports to the United States is helping that cause, but even then the domestic compulsions like you basically the employment issue and other kinds of issues are making life a bit difficult for him. Uh, and one important point to be noted here is that somewhere, although, and this is the dilemma, this is the this is the contradiction that one can see in Biden administration. On one hand, he's talking about global warming, the cause of global warming and all. On the other hand, he is the one who is raising tariffs for uh, uh, these imports from China, and he seems to his administration is also looking at it in terms of what you know is some people are calling a new kind of tech war when it comes to green energy. Given the amount of technology that is involved in in basically in this whole business of EV and lithium ion and all that ion battery, he is and then when it comes to solar panels, we again know that there is a Xinjiang story, a human rights story associated to that. So given all this, I think the current administration is dealing with a certain kind of, a certain set of dilemmas. On one hand, it wants to promote, the cause of climate change. On the other hand, it also has to, respond to a very strong, constituency or more than one constituency uh, who are basically talking of, China's edge over United States in green technology. So therefore, how does he deal with it? He just cannot succumb. So this is the dilemma, and therefore I think out of this dilemma has come, which we all know, is the Inflation Reduction Act. We all know that it has got nothing to do with today's inflation in the United States. The idea is basically to, prop up, green manufacturing, make United States self-sufficient in energy, and to see to it that the coming generations are able to get their energy requirements addressed without paying high costs. Again, these are, off the cuff responses. I'm not very sure, to what extent they are structured, but these are the thoughts which come to my mind as I respond to your comments.
Thank you. Next, please.
Just, next question is from Rappai Malayakal, addressed to Professor Raman. China's role in the global supply chain and technical ability has gone much beyond any single power to manipulate or control. Your comments, please.
Thank you, Professor. Yeah, I think I've already mentioned during my presentation that given the so, for example, let's take the case of Apple. One of the reasons why Tim Cook became CEO of Apple is the way he was able to engineer, one can say, world class, world standards, supply chain for the, you know, Apple's iconic iPhone. But as and that kind of a tech value chain, which Apple facilitated, high, leading to iPhone and all that, that has significantly impacted the way China has come up the tech value chains. Many of the domestic players have become world class, but because of this US-China tech war, now Apple is forced to look for an alternative supply chain. One set of supply chain which already is established for the Chinese consumers, and another set of supply chain which is for the non-Chinese consumers. So now India is, one of the significant destinations, and Foxconn has followed, Apple here, and hopefully, we are going to see Apple creating what it has created in China when it comes to the, world-class supply chain here. Now, if we recall, during COVID, the Japanese government, gave some not very good at numbers, but I think it dangled out a major concession of $15 million, if I can recall. Asking some of the SMEs, Japanese SMEs who are facing a lot of problems in China to relocate to Japan and start their businesses. And Nissan said that nothing doing. We are not going to come. We are not going to relocate because most of our suppliers, of the various automobile parts are world class and they are all Chinese. It makes absolutely no sense for us to relocate to Japan, raise the cost of production, and then make ourselves less competitive by selling Nissan cars to the Chinese market at higher costs. So that is one example. Third example, which I would like to give is, it is said that, the United States has disrupted the tech value chains, seeking to impact, the progress that many of the Chinese companies are making. But according to some, not all the, companies have got impacted, not all the industries have got impacted. The EV industry is significantly dominated by the local supply chain built by the Chinese. So therefore, there is no impact of that. When it comes to the defense industry in China is again completely dependent on the local supply chains. Now, what is, of worry for the Chinese is that are they going to have the wherewithal to build robust supply chains in all the other industries as they've been able to design, fabricate, or create for themselves in the case of green energy? That is the challenge that is awaiting them. So therefore, otherwise, in some of the, industries, Apple's iPhone is example, the trade, US-China trade war has made, has been the major disruptor. But otherwise, we are increasingly seeing that, in certain industries, if not all, the globe is going to be compelled to be part of the supply chains that have originated within China. I'll stop here.
Professor Raman, the next question is from Hoymonti Gogoi, who is a research intern at ICS. So, how has the oscillation between isolationist and interventionist policies in the US political discourse on China impacted the long term strategic objectives of both nations, and what insights can be gained from a comparative analysis of these periods for future policy development? Thank you.
Uh, Very good question. Given that Kishan sir has tuned me to be as brief as possible, let me try to answer this question with an example. When I was, for my fellowship in US, one of the questions that I have been asking is, do you think that the Americans will be able to, uh, will, will they be successful in uh, in basically checking China's tech progress? Because we already have an example where the Americans have been able to check, we have seen Americans failing in checking India's aspirations to become independent in nuclear energy, for example. So when the Americans sanctioned India after 1973, India refused to, change its stance and say that we stand for complete disarmament and we are not in favor of arms control. And that led to a lot of pressure. India was stigmatized by the nuclear suppliers groups, the CTBT, blah, 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 all MTCR and all that came. But finally, India succeeded. And 1997, again, the Laughing Buddha happened. And after a brief period, suddenly we see that India started speaking from a position of strength, and that led to the much talked about Indo-US civilian nuclear treaty. And, and so therefore, I basically was sharing with one scholar saying that the Americans have failed. And then he said that, are you sure? I don't think so. And then I asked him to elaborate, and he said that, the very fact that, the Americans stigmatized India for 20 years and postponed India's ambitions, that itself is a success of sorts. So therefore, given, the current US policy towards China to stifle China of, high-end chips, and the kind of impact it is having on the semiconductor industry and the tech ambitions of China. Of course, China is on a different trajectory. China has more money. China has deeper pockets. China has perhaps, arguably, even greater political will, etc., etc. But it's going to take time. And to what extent the Americans can, postpone China's ambitions, that is going to determine, the success of American policy towards China when it comes to, the tech war. If China is, as China is doing now, it has now completely changed its model of development. It is now shifting away from putting money on infrastructure to green technology, to, building its semiconductor industry, by the 2035 plan, the 14th five-year plan. So if, China is going to be successful in achieving its ambitions, that's not enough. By when? What's the time period? That is going to determine, whether US policy has been success or not. And that is also going to determine, the outcome of this power rivalry. And as we say that, the chip, many scholars have said already, the chip war is not merely a chip war. Perhaps it is one of the manifestations, if not the only one, of a civilizational war between US and China. Yeah.
Yes.
Any more
The,
questions, Megha Kumari?
yes, Mr. Raina. So the next question that he has asked, given the nature of the challenges posed by China from economic, military, technology, and geopolitical dimensions, why does the United States consider China to be a more significant potential danger than Russia in current global context? Thank you.
Simply, the very short answer is uh, today's Russia is born out of yesterday's Soviet Union, which broke down, and China is yet to break down. It's a very formidable power, and it's the kind of industrial strength that it has built for itself. More than 60% of the American GDP, which is nowhere close to what Soviet Union was during the Cold War. Uh, so so therefore, what we see today is assuming that the Communist Party of China is going to continue, is going to be in power for some time. Definitely, Xi Jinping, whenever he relinquishes power, he will be replaced by someone else from the Politburo Standing Committee. But with Russia, one is not sure. After Putin, who? So therefore, no matter what Xi Jinping says, what Xi Jinping does, he is not a Mao Zedong. And so therefore, still, it is the party and not Xi Jinping which rules China today. In Russia, one Putin is going to be replaced by another Putin. That's, very, very doubtful. So therefore, one can say, if one can use that word, in China, there is far more institutional stability and predictability when it, as compared to, Russia.
Okay. Thank you very much. I think we are at the end of the questions. Am I right, Megha Kumari?
Yes, Mr.
Okay.
Rana.
So
There is no questions.
we still have a few minutes, and if anybody wants now to use the raise hand option to put a question directly to Professor Venkatraman, you're welcome to do so. But while somebody may be thinking over a raised hand question, let me really give you my little concluding view a little bit in advance, just in order to save time. I think Professor Venkatraman has given us a very comprehensive, persuasive set of ideas which call for reflection, which call for thinking, and deeper examination. A question like the one that he tackled cannot really be answered in a simple, easy way, and certainly not in an hour-plus discussion. But it should provoke our own thinking to come to our own conclusions as to where we are headed. The very last question that was put by Hoymontic Gogoi was a very interesting one, in that he asked whether the why the US views China as a greater danger today than the Soviet Union. Well, the Soviet Union has, in fact, an enormous arsenal of nuclear weapons. And so Russia, my apologies, Russia is, of course, very much among the major powers on the globe. But what is the nature of power? That in itself is a question that calls for reflection. It consists of many, many different elements, and economic power is increasingly a major component of a nation's total power. And on that matrix alone, China very much ranks as the second biggest power. Now, coexisting with these two great powers are a number of other powers, and they also have their own role and their significance. We can think of the European Union, we can think of Japan, and we should think of India also as a potential power. there were some questions about why India does not speed up its economic development. I think India is making every effort possible to do that. We may have different views whether a particular government should, at that time, pursue one or another set of policies. But putting that aside, I would say in all sincerity that the Modi government has done a remarkable job of carrying India forward, not just through external economic achievements, but domestic economic achievements in terms of addressing the poorest of the poor, raising living standards, etc. You know that story. I don't have to narrate it to an audience which is essentially an Indian audience. But there are many unfinished tasks, and I think we tackle them the best way we can. It's like juggling a whole series of balls up in the air, and somebody may jump in and say, oh, but you should have paid more attention to that particular ball. That kind of a discussion can go on endlessly. Um I now I don't see a raised hand so far. There is perhaps one more question that has come from someone. Uh, yes, from Colonel Gopinath, Colonel Gururaj Gopinath Pamiri, who has thanked um, the speaker. And he says, what should be the discourse here in India with respect to China, given our past and ongoing points of friction with China? Venkat, would you like to give a response to that? And with that, also give your final concluding remarks so that we can close this session by 15 hours in 75 minutes, which was really my original target. Thank you, Venkat.
Yeah, thank you, sir. Yeah, discourse in India with respect to China. I think whether we like it or not, given that we are in a world which is increasingly interconnected, to what, and more importantly, the way China, even if in an ideal world, we would like to be distanced with China. But the fact that China is very deeply connected to the rest of the world, and not that everyone is, having a very hunky-dory relationship with China. So everyone has one kind of an issue or the other. That's part and parcel of international system. So I think as far as the boundary dispute is concerned, there's absolutely no compromise. And, the Indian government's stance, whatever official stance is, one has to stick by that. But having said that, that should not come in the way of trying to explore ties, on the other front. Already we are having economic ties with China. We should try to explore, what are the different ways in which, India can address the trade deficit with China, and only consultations are the way forward. I don't think, we can, uh, there's a substitute to dialogue. That's what I would, opine, and I stay there.
Thank you very much, Venkat. It remains only for me to thank our speaker for all the time and trouble and effort he has made to bring a complicated issue on the table and present his views. My deep thanks to my friends from the Institute uh, for all their painstaking efforts in organizing this event and bringing it to us in a manner which is smooth and efficient. And of course, very soon, a full recording of this discussion will be on YouTube. So once again, my profound thanks to all of you for taking part in this, and especially to Professor Venkat Raman for his presentation. Thank you very much. With this, we can close today's session. Thank
Thank
you.
you, sir. Thank you. It's an honor to have a session, where you have been my moderator. Thanks a lot. Thanks to ICS again.
Thank you, Mr. Rana. I seek your
Yeah,
permission to formally bring an end to today's session.
sure. Goodbye,
Okay.
everyone. Thanks.
Okay. Thank you. Bye bye.
With this, we come to the end of today's seminar. We thank Professor G. Venkatraman and Ambassador Kisan S. Rana for gracing today's seminar with their presence and sharing their precious time with us. We also offer our gratitude to the audience. The video of today's seminar shall be available on the ICS's YouTube channel. We extend a warm invitation to all for upcoming Wednesday seminar scheduled for 24th July at 3 p.m. IST. The title of this seminar is China's Industrial Policy Analyzing Words versus Deeds. Details about our Wednesday seminars can be found on the ICS website, or you can subscribe to our newsletter for regular updates. Thank you everyone for joining us today. Thank you.